Welcome to Luca Sprues. This time I will be doing a time-lapse and review of Airfix's 1:72 scale Messerschmitt Bf109. I made this aircraft to be part of a Dunkirk-inspired diorama with a Spitfire ditching at sea and a 109 doing a flyover. The Spitfire and diorama will be a future video. Straight out of the box, the kit demonstrates the classic Airfix features of beautiful moulding, minimal flash, very clear instructions, and nice decals. However, I decided I wanted to do a different scheme to what was in the box, and since I'd been experimenting with custom decals, I decided to try them on this model. Assembly begins with the interior and the propeller. I built the propeller, then put together the cockpit floor, seats, and instrument panel. I then painted the interior Tamiya XF22 RLM grey and used a fine brush to paint black on the instrument panel, floor, and use for the finer details on the cockpit walls. Overall, the detail is very decent and clear on the interior. The instrument panel has no raised details, however it has a decent set of decals for the instruments. Tamiya XF16 flat aluminium was also used for the rudder pedals and some of the interior detailing. After sliding on the instrument decals, I placed the pilot inside before assembling the cockpit and fuselage halves. I cover building and painting the figure of the pilot in the next video. The fuselage, halves and wings go together perfectly with virtually no gaps between either parts. However, I did accidentally have a slight gap between the flaps and the wings, possibly due to not sanding enough of the knobs off. I also drilled out the holes for a model stand that are generally on all Airfix kits. The kit comes with the option to have the flaps either retracted or extended. Since my 109 was going to be in flight, I chose to have the flaps retracted. After attaching the radiators and undercarriage to the wings, I then attached the wings to the fuselage. The wings and fuselage came together easily and I didn't have much of a gap at all. There wasn't even much sanding to do. While gluing the halves together, I accidentally got some glue on the fuselage and had to sand it back and rescore the panel lines where my fingers had been. With most of the aircraft built, it was time to add the rudder and horizontal stabilizers. With a slight bit of touching up from the sprue frame, the parts were ready. All of these parts fitted easily into place and stayed at a very good angle without needing much support. The finer details were like the air inlets, tail wheel, exhausts, and the struts on the horizontal stabilizers were then added. All of these parts fitted well except for the exhaust, which was difficult to sand enough of the sprue without accidentally snapping them. I decided to place the front cowling over the engine details and then move on to the canopy. The canopies fitted very well into place and come in 3 pieces so that they can be built open. I accidentally fogged up a part of the main canopy piece, but this was mostly hidden by the pilot's head. I wanted my pilot to be saluting the Spitfire as it ditched, as a small detail and to give a personality to the pilot. The scheme I decided to create for my 109 was White 14 from JG2. This aircraft was post-Dunkirk, however I chose it for its distinctive colour scheme. Painting began with the lightest colour first, Tamiya XF23 light blue, which was on the aircraft's underside. I used water-based acrylics because they are easy to clean up after and dilute with water and have their very quick drying time. The second colour was for the upper sides, RLM grey, which was used on the interior as well. After this, I built up another layer of light blue. I used the biggest brush available to minimise strokes and always go in the direction of the airflow over the aircraft. This creates a smooth and uniform layer resembling airbrush work. To keep the paint layers from being too thick, I dilute them with water. Building it up in layers also means you don't end up with a thick layer that covers over the details. The third and darkest colour is Model Master's RLM71. It's added on over the top of RLM grey. Doing a German camouflage scheme with a hand brush can be a bit challenging because they tend to have very straight and sharp edges between the colours, rather than the softer patterns of allied schemes. To paint these, it requires a bit of careful painting, creating a shape and then filling in the details, but trying to stay in the direction of the airflow. I added a second layer of the RLM colours to make them stronger before adding some pre-shading effects and pin wash by using a graphite pencil over the panel lines. The graphite can be easily rubbed off and stays in the gaps, which brings out the details. I applied one last layer of the colours to the model to soften the effect before adding finer details such as the canopy frame and finalising the camo scheme. After adding the final layers of the colour scheme and then gently scraping off any mistakes on the canopy with a wooden cocktail stick, I finally added on the distinctive yellow nose and tail of this particular scheme using Tamiya XF4 yellow-green. The propeller and spinner hubs were painted RLM 71, which I thought nicely contrasted the yellow nose. After finishing the propeller, I added on the finer details such as the gold for the exhausts and used the same combination of interior colours to dry brush the engine details. Silver was also used for the machine gun's tail wheel and to weather parts of the frame for the engine interior. I used black for the tyres and then neatened up the cowling with yellow and light blue for the underside and near the wheel wells. For my custom decals, I used a combination of white-backed and transparent ones to get the squadron markings and then used the common decals from the Airfix kit for the stencils and Luftwaffe roundels. This was my first time using lightly coloured or white decals, but overall I was happy with the results. The Airfix decals were, as always, easy to apply, conformed well to the model, and none broke or silvered in the entire process. Due to the techniques I used for my custom decals, I had to paint in the white areas I didn't want white on the backing paper, but this was not too difficult with a small brush, and was made even easier by having a modelling colour scheme, which I applied later on. After neatening up the details with the white decals using the fine brush, I added the modelling. This was done using a combination of water and watered down RLM Grey and RLM 71 to create the modelling look on this camo scheme. By using diluted acrylics, it creates a soft effect that can be toned differently using drops of water or acrylic paint. After some finer detail touching up, I applied the transparent decals I made over the white ones to bring out the darker colours and define their edges more. For both the common and custom decals, I soaked them in water before applying an adhesive to help them conform to the panel lines and surfaces of the model. After applying all the decals, I then moved on to the finer details, which I painted off camera while they were on the sprue. These included the cannon barrels, the pitot tube, control aids, and the antenna. After adding on all the small and delicate details, the next step was to add metal chipping, mainly on the surfaces exposed to the airflow, the propeller blades, controls, access ports for the fuel and oils, and finally the wing where the pilot and mechanics would climb on. I also used heavily watered down black for the gun smoke and the control surfaces to create some staining. With the chipping completed, I added more exhaust streaks and stains as well as leaking from oil in the direction of the airflow coming out of the cooling inlets as well as the exhausts. With the final exhaust streak effects completed, the model was finished. The Airfix 109 goes together extremely easily and with not much sanding or needing for filling gaps. The details are decent and very crisp and clear, and the result, in my opinion, is a very nice looking aircraft. I would certainly recommend it to beginners due to its ease of construction and low cost. It could also be a good kit for more professional builders using advanced techniques and aftermarket parts. Thanks to everyone for liking, subscribing and commenting. The support is really great and I appreciate all of it. Be sure to check out part 2 where I build a Spitfire and put the final diorama together.